Hello everybody, Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw! It's not Monday, but Metagross is here, and when Metagross is here, we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays, we wear pink.
And if she says, the waiter I had today was so rude, I shouldn't say, maybe you should just order something on the menu for once. No. I should just say, what a jerk. Yeah! And if she says, Phil, the TV's driving me crazy, I should just say, I know, there is not enough quality programming for women.
No. Turn off the damn TV.
It's been a minute. I haven't been able to make a tier list, so I'm so excited to be back here with you. This is going to be a Metagross tier list where I rank every single Pokemon inside of Pokemon Unite. And to give you a good idea of what this tier list is sort of based on is the play that 99% of the players inside the game are going to be facing, which is the ranked mode inside the game. Mostly solo queue, but also there's going to be some considerations for people playing duos, trios. 5 stacking and competitive is a different animal, and there are different considerations to be made, but this is what most of us are dealing with here in Pokemon Unite. We're gonna take a look at our tiers here, and as always, if there's a Pokemon that you like and that you are good with, it doesn't really matter where someone puts it in a tier list or where its win rate is. If you're good with it and provide value for your team, that's excellent. What I'm gonna be doing inside this tier list is sort of ranking type against type, essentially. So it's apples versus apples, not apples versus oranges. We don't really need to know how Snorlax, stacks up against Dragapult, but Dragapult and Cinderace, well, that's a conversation to be had. Here are our tiers. We have our God tier, where we're only going to put one Pokemon for this current update. We're not frickin' Norse around here. We have our S tier. These Pokemon are super duper good, super duper broken, sort of the best stuff in the game that's clearly overpowered. We have our A+ tier. These are things that are almost making it into that S tier, even though I think they're insanely good. They're maybe not as Dobrokin as everything else in the S tier. We have our A tier. These are extremely good choices inside the game. I would say a cut above sort of the average or a little bit above average. So really, really solid choices. We have our B+ tier. Ugh, ew. B+ tier is going to be Pokemon that are, they're better than like fine. They're better than fine. Then we have our B tier. You really hope that this is the last B tier we ever see here before the new year, but I just know that's not true. Still got the B tier. We have our C tier. These are Pokemon that I think that are kind of below average and maybe could use some love. And then we have our Decidueye Memorial tier, our D tier, a tier named after Decidueye because at one point Decidueye was terrible. Now Decidueye does not reside there, but we're going to put a couple Pokemon inside the D tier that I think really could use some love and attention by the developers. Let's get into it. I didn't get to talk much about Meowscarada, so I'm going to start with our speedsters here, and then we're going to move on to a few of our other categories. We have a lot of great Pokemon in our speedster role. I'm just going to start putting them up on our tier list right now as we talk about them. Every single one of them is B+. No, I kid. Speedsters are really interesting because speedster Pokemon are high skill, almost there really isn't a speedster Pokemon that doesn't take at least a decent amount of mechanical skill to play. They're pretty squishy. They do a lot of burst damage. They can have a huge impact inside the game, and they can also do absolutely nothing. They're, in my opinion, the least important role inside of Pokemon Unite. If there was one role that, if a team said, we can't have one role, I would say just don't have a speedster. You'll find a good attacker or all-rounder that'll kind of fill that spot. Although, that being said, speedsters are some of my favorite, if not my favorite Pokemon to play inside of Pokemon Unite. So many of them are so fun and so good. Let's start going through them here. There are a few that are better than the rest, and those are going to be Dodrio and Zoroark. Between the two, I'd say Zoroark is probably still better, one of the most skill-intensive Pokemon inside the game. However, there are definitely times that Dodrio just seems to operate a little better than Zoroark. It is enemy team comp dependent. Obviously, we are playing in a situation where you don't know what the enemy team is going to have. All that will change with draft coming soon, which actually will change these tier lists a little bit too. But as far as these two Pokemon, I would say they're both A+ choices. Neither of them are S right now, in my opinion, in regular play. They're just a little too squishy, I think, and they don't do as much damage as other things that are a little more brain dead to play, but extremely solid Pokemon inside the game. Either order you put these in, I think, is totally fine. Nice thing about both of these too is you don't necessarily need to play these in the central area, which is pretty cool. A lot of speedsters, it does feel like you want them there, but both Zoroark and Dodrio do pretty well in lane and stack pretty easily, so that's a nice benefit for them. Let's talk about our next ones. I think our next highest speedster on the list, there are two of them. I think it's going to be Absol and Leafeon. I think Leafeon is... I've said for a long time, I think Leafeon's really, really good, but you know, it just doesn't seem to win as much as Dodrio and Zoroark. It's great. It has an early massive power spike at level 4. In the hands of a very solid player, it's extremely good, but I don't think it's as good as Dodrio and Zoroark, in my opinion. Me personally, I think I would rather have Dodrio or Zoroark on my team if they were skilled. If they were not, Leafeon's almost always going to be better. Absol, actually, I think is a pretty slept on speedster, got buffed a little while back, and is really, really strong. I think Absol, it does not get its credit. It's kind of a little bit of a forgotten Pokemon by most of the community, but I think Absol's very, very strong. Now we have Talon, Zeraora, Gengar, and Meowscarada. The thing about speedsters in general, all of them are carries, right? They're all strong carry Pokemon, so you're going to be able to do well really with any of these Pokemon and influence a match. But if I'm trying to rank all of these against each other, I feel like it's probably going to look something like... it's hard, but I think Gengar would be lower. And maybe it's either Talon or it's Zeraora that drops down a little bit. I would say it's tough. I prefer Talon more, but I actually think Zeraora, it probably provides overall more team value, even though it's such a underpicked Pokemon inside the game. It's probably more like this. The tier list is probably more like this. So Zeraora, after the buffs it got a while back, it's actually really strong. It just got buffed and then Mewtwo happened, and honestly, like, it completely got overlooked. I think it's actually a really, really solid Pokemon right now. Pretty solid, B+, good carry. Meowscarada, I think, is better than people think, especially after the buffs. I think Meowscarada is doing great. The thing about Meowscarada is, with Double Team especially, Meowscarada is one of the best baiters inside the game. I would say it's master at baiting the enemy into some incredibly unfortunate Unite moves. So Meowscarada is, I think, better than people think, even though it's in sort of a group of Pokemon that kind of all released sort of okay. And I think Meowscarada is just a victim of releasing okay and then getting a nice little buff, and a lot of people not expecting it to a lot of people not expecting, but a lot of people maybe not acknowledging that it's actually pretty decent. The other thing is it's going to be unlocked for a lot of players right now-ish, and you're going to see a lot of bad Meowscarada, so you're going to think it's pretty bad. Talon, really good in the hands of a skilled Talon player. It honestly probably could even be in this B+ tier. Same thing with Gengar. The thing about all of these speedsters is in the hands of a skilled player, they're all really good. But the thing about Gengar is it just really doesn't have the kind of mobility that you need. And the thing about Talon is, for whatever reason, Talon players are some of the worst players inside of Pokemon Unite, outside of a few Pokemon that we're going to talk about in a bit. So that's my take on the speedsters. You don't really need to do too much to them. You could probably have a little buff to Talon or a little buff to Gengar. You maybe could see another small pass at Zeraora, Meowscarada, but all of these are doing pretty well inside the meta. Let's move on to some of our supporters, a category that is just unbelievably stacked with insane Pokemon right now. I'll just start putting them out here. We've got Sableye, Wigglytuff, we have Hoopa, Mr. Mime, Eldegoss, Blissey, Clefable, and Comfey. Supporters are broken. They are just such an unbelievably powerful role inside the game. Now, if you're playing by yourself, your win rate's not going to be as high if you're playing a supporter as if you are playing a speedster. If you're, like, let's say, very, very good with both. The situation for that being you just can't influence the game as much when you can't carry. That being said, again, I'm rating these against other supporters, and a team with a good supporter versus a team without a good supporter. I mean, the team without a good supporter it feels like an unwinnable game. So let's start going through the roster right here. Sableye is the only one who I will say is not bad, but I've talked about this before. I would say its position in the game is just kind of confusing. It's kind of confused rating. It's a little like Wigglytuff and Mime in that they're all sort of supporters, but they support in a disruptive way, which is a cool way to have these Pokemon sort of interact inside the game. But also it can be a little tough to find as much value in them for a team as you would out of something like Blissey or Clefable, because they're just able to, sustain a team through the most important moments inside the game, whereas these Pokemon, not as much. I would say Sableye is useful and also one of the worst allies you're ever going to have, one of the most annoying enemies you're ever going to fight. And in general, I feel like its position in the game in like solo, duo, trio in ranked is just a bit of a head scratcher. And that's why I put it in the Decidueye Memorial tier. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying you can't win with it. I'm not saying a good Sableye is not very, very useful. It's just a really weird Pokemon to slot into a team. And when you see that as your supporter on your squad, it's like, it reminds me of a held item you want to run, but boy, there are other held items that are so much better and just so much more useful. So I'm sorry to all the little Gremlin fans out there. I just think I wish this Pokemon had a better function inside of a team environment sometimes. Wigglytuff also sort of runs into this for me. It's fine from a tank perspective. I'd keep it here in probably the B tier, maybe the C tier. It's actually a pretty decent tank, and now that Umbreon isn't in every single game, its Unite move is a little more viable. In general, I think Wiggly is fine. It's fine. It's not amazing. It could maybe use a buff. It could be C tier. Mr. Mime, I actually think, is doing a little bit better. And in fact, a lot of Pokemon are doing a bit better because of Resident Guard. I think Mime Resident Guard is a great item selection for this Pokemon. You're seeing a lot of play, not only with Confusion Barrier, because, we got a buff to Mime, but also you're seeing Psychic, Guard Swap, and things like that doing very, very well right now. I think Mime is just in a better spot because of a great item that helps it out a ton. Hoopa is amazing, and Hoopa's better coordinated than it is non-coordinated. If I have to, Hoopa's either A or A+. Coordinated, it's probably S, like maybe one of the best Pokemon inside the entire game. Uncoordinated play, the thing about Hoopa is you can force an ally to take a soft-boiled egg from Blissey, but you can't force an ally to use your portals and stuff like that. I think Hoopa's probably either A or A+. It's still insanely good, don't get me wrong, but for some reason, sometimes teams just don't want to work with you. Eldegoss is A+, in my opinion. It's a lot like Hoopa, but it just has, easier healing that you're able to control a little bit better for your squad. Incredible shields. You can also use it as a bit of a carry. One of the best Pokemon for new players, by the way. If you're a new player and you're thinking of picking up a supporter, I think Eldegoss is one of the best Pokemon for new players. It's a great way to learn how to play the game, and it's so incredibly mean early. Blissey, I will also put up into A+. Crazy good, insane healing. It did get a couple nerfs a little while back when Mewtwo Y was sort of the most absurd thing in the game. They're like, all right, we got to do something about Blissey, Mewtwo Y. But Blissey's still insanely good. One of the best. And supporters are just so broken. Next two supporters, I think, are profoundly broken right now, and that's Clefable and Comfey. Comfey is not going to be our God tier Pokemon. I'm already telling you right now. But I do think Comfey is quietly still the most overpowered thing in some ways in the entire game. It takes a carry Pokemon on the enemy team. It takes, basically, Comfey. If a Comfey attaches to the best player on a team, it's like having two of those players, basically. You're allowing the best player on the team to do very, very well. Now, if a Comfey attaches to the worst player on the team, well, I guess it's, it is what it is. But Comfey, I think, is honestly one of the most absurdly broken things inside of Pokemon Unite, especially in non-coordinated play. There's almost nothing you can do against a good Comfey and a good carry. They're going to be level 15 at Ray. They're going to make sure that they're not KO'able. It's a really unfair combination without coordination. And then we have Clefable. Clefable's the most disgusting thing in the game right now, I swear to you. Gravity is so gross. Follow Me is incredible. Moonlight's disgusting. This Pokemon, truly, it takes every Pokemon you want to play and you're like, there's a Clefable on the enemy. Like every Speedster, you look at Clefable and you're like, wow, great. I have a horrible match now because of this one Pokemon that you're seeing a lot, by the way. It's so popular in the meta. Clefable is absolutely nuts. All right. Let's move on to our attackers right here. So many good attackers, so many different sort of vibes for them. So I'll try to go through them a little bit by their category. Let's start with, let's just start with sort of our auto attackers because there are a few insane ones right now. Let's get them out there. We've got our Greninja, our Dragapult, our Mewtwo Y, our Cinderace. I'll kind of include Inteleon, Decidueye, and Duraludon in that mix. And that's kind of about what we're looking at. You could also sort of put Glaceon in this conversation in an interesting way. Glaceon's like a weird one, but let's put them all out there and let me adjust my tier list. So a couple cool things happened with attackers recently. We had some Dragapult buffs that were very much needed. We had some Mewtwo Y nerfs that were very much needed. We have Greninja getting some interesting buffs. Cinder was buffed a couple patches ago. Inteleon got nerfs, very deserved. Duraludon had some like up and down a little while back. And, Razor Leaf Decidueye got buffs as well as its Unite move. And then, of course, Glaceon got some buffs recently. So all of these Pokemon have been buffed. And you know what? They probably all deserved it, except obviously Mewtwo Y. Mewtwo Y, because as a role, this role has not been doing that amazing for a while. Inside of uncoordinated solo play, all these Pokemon still have the ability to rip an objective and take it down, and that's really valuable in this style of play, honestly. But I am going to rank them, again, against each other and try to give you a relative value for each one of them. Let's start with one of the big ones, Dragapult. I think Dragapult is up into our S tier right now. Yes, you could maybe make an argument that it's a little closer to A, but its win rate skyrocketed from like sub 50% all the way to 53% or something like that. Its build is kind of crazy right now. I think Dragapult is probably the best auto attacker that doesn't have the word Mewtwo in its name currently, and it even gives Mewtwo a run for its money. Dragapult's nuts, and the changes to it were probably long overdue and maybe a bit much, but I honestly think it's nice to see Dragapult shining for a little bit here. And I do think it's one of the best Pokemon in the game, especially in uncoordinated play. You just stack up your attack with Phantom Force, getting those KOs, and you just become an absolute beast inside some of these games. Speaking of Mewtwo Y is still in our S tier. It's an EX Pokemon, and the EX Pokemon have that little symbol for a reason, because they're extra broken. Incredibly good, still very, very strong. Again, you can only have one Mewtwo on a team, and either of them are incredible choices. Mewtwo Y, great as that special attack all-rounder, one of the dumbest Unite moves in the game. I could go on and on about Mewtwo. Have you heard me complain about Mewtwo before? All right. Greninja, I actually think I still think they could do a little bit to Greninja, but I think it's okay. Here's the thing about Greninja. Here's the thing about all of these Pokemon. If you get a nice little level lead and you attack at the right time, you can wipe the entire enemy team. These are all really strong carries. They really are in different ways. So I don't know. Greninja's probably maybe B+ right now. I would say Cinderace is B or B+ again. It's still really strong. It maybe is. It's like Greninja and Cinderace are kind of right here. They both could trade spots, honestly. Either way you were looking at them. I think the changes to Greninja are actually pretty nice, and I actually love playing Water Shuriken, so I think that's pretty fun. I'll put it in B+ for now. You can really carry with it. Inteleon I don't think is S. It might be S, but it did get a nerf to its most nonsense ability, and that win rate has plummeted for liquidation. If you're a great snipe shot player, you're probably still absolutely insane. It's not like they took away its Unite move, which is one of the best inside the entire game. I think Inteleon is actually just being underplayed right now because something else feels a little more broken. I'm going to put it in our A+ tier, but I bet snipe shot's probably still in our S tier here. Duraludon, I think, is always better than people think, just because of how good it is at ripping objectives and securing and how powerful its autos are. I'm going to put it in our B+ tier here. I would say Decidueye resides in our A tier. Both builds for it, I think, are pretty solid right now. However, I think Spirit Shackle is just sort of a game-changing ability, and any ability that lets you secure massive objectives and win conditions at extreme range is going to be extremely powerful. I'm going to say Decidueye is up into our A tier, while Glaceon, I think, is in our A+ tier. It might even be a little better sometimes. Glaceon's just dumb, and the buffs they gave it are dumb. And it's dumb. It's so easy to win with. It's so easy to play. One of the things that I think people don't think enough about is ease of play with some of these Pokemon, and Glaceon is one of the easiest things to play the Icicle Spear build. One of the easiest things to find value from in the entire game. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, it just means you don't have to try that hard to be incredibly annoying, rip objectives. Just targeting an enemy, sometimes you're like, wow, I got targeted by Icicle Spear and now I'm gone. So yeah, I think Glaceon hanging out in our A+ tier is very, very fair. Let's take a look at some of our mage-like Pokemon. There's kind of like a few in here that are not exactly this, but we'll throw a lot of them onto the board here. Pika, Espeon, Mew, Guardy, Delphox, Shandy, Venusaur kind of sits in here, so does... I'll just put the rest of the attackers on, because they all are different levels of sort of this role. Sylveon's probably the one that's like the least like the rest of the others. Our mages are really strong. Slick Spoon is still incredibly good. Special attackers are still doing very well inside of Pokemon Unite. Insane damage from afar. And a lot of them are really solid additions to the team. You usually don't want sort of two of these kind of Pokemon on one team, but that's mostly true of any role. Maybe outside of defender inside the game. So I think a lot of these are really, really solid. But of course, I'm going to rank them against each other and try to find which ones I think rise to the top. I think Espeon's probably close to B+ right now. Very, very solid Pokemon. I think both builds are good. You're seeing a lot more play with stored power lately. And it's really strong, honestly. It's really strong, can carry hard, plays well in lane. Pikachu, I think, probably also hangs out in B+. I think Pikachu was better in the Mewtwo Y meta, just because Mewtwo Y played at a very specific range, and Thunderbolt Pika almost like directly countered that range. And right now, I think the meta it's a little more all over the place, which I absolutely love. You see a wider variety than you did when like Mewtwo Y was just incredibly broken. But I think Pikachu does lose a little value not running into a certain setup all the time. That being said, I think Pika's still doing pretty good inside the game. Mew is busted, and it's either S or A+. It's either S or A+. It's hard to say Mew's not S. It really is. But hanging out with Inteleon and Glaceon here, I think, is a pretty fair place to put it. These are all extremely good Pokemon in our A+ tier. I might leave Mew right there. In the hands of the most skilled Mew players out there, it's probably still the most broken thing in the game. Guardy's doing pretty good. I think Guardy hangs out in our B+ tier. I like it. I think it does better coordinated than it does solo. It doesn't have a lot of mobility, right? But still, Guardy's very, very strong. Delphox is maybe slightly better only because of its mobility. However, I do think Guardy probably outshines Delphox in coordinated play. But in solo, duo, trio, I think Delphox probably has a little bit more value. That being said, Delphox, it feels like it's not played as much anymore, which is interesting. But I actually think Delphox is doing pretty good right now. Candle, I think, is doing very well. I think the buffs to Candle are great. I love that Poltergeist got buffed. I mean, letting enemies run into my weird room of furniture is one of my favorite things, and I think both Shandy builds are doing really, really great right now. For me, if I had to pick between Shandy and Guardy, and they're kind of similar, or even Shandy and Delphox, I pick Shandy over all of them. I really love playing Chandelure. Venusaur's probably A+. Venusaur In uncoordinated play, even Solar Beam is insanely good. Its Unite move is crazy. And Petal Dance Giga Drain has not seen much coordinated play, but it's still a brutal build in uncoordinated play because it's just a really hard Pokemon to take down. And anything with that much self-sustain and that much presence in some of these fights is very powerful. A9. I think A9's great. I'd say A9's probably A. 9. I would say A9's probably in the A tier. The other day someone was like, what's A9? Alolan, A, 9 Ninetales. I think both builds are doing pretty well right now too. Some are sleeping on Avalanche Blizzard a little bit. It's crazy good. Cram is a weird one. A different Pokemon from all of these Pokemon. Dive Cram I think is still insanely good, insanely high skill, and really, really powerful. Cram's doing great inside this meta. I feel like it's a very solid choice. And then we have Sylveon, which I actually think is not bad at all, but I do think Sylveon needs some buffs. I think Sylveon, it not even to like Hyper Voice, but you know, Mystical Fire. I'm not saying that. I really think they should do something with its Unite move. Honestly, I do. You have all of these Pokemon that get their Unite moves changed. Like, I think Sylveon needs a change. It's not bad, but I'm putting it down here because this is like an area where I think Pokemon could use some attention. And that's where I'm going to put it. Also, its role is odd. It's like a mid-range skirmisher as an attacker. And it's not that... It's bulky. It's like the bulkiest attack. It's a weird one. It's a weird one. Okay, let's move on to our defenders. Oh, they're so broken. Defenders and supporters inside Unite, you guys are just... Ugh. They're so strong. All right, let's get them all up on our list here. All right, let me make sure. Yeah, we're still looking pretty good here. Okay, so our defenders. So many good ones. You really can't go wrong as a group with these Pokemon. There are a few that are kind of more head scratchy than others, but in general, one of the most important roles inside the game. And gosh, they're so strong. And gosh, they're so tanky. And man, they're so valuable to have inside of a match of Pokemon Unite. The only one that I think is questionable is Greedent. The past few tier lists, I put Greedent into our Decidueye Memorial tier. I'm going to do it again. Greedent's not bad. You can win with Greedent. Greedent's a lot like Sableye, where I just feel like, and kind of Sylveon, where I just feel like their roles are a little murkier than other Pokemon. You can definitely win with them. Greedent's one of my most played Pokemon inside of Pokemon Unite. But man, when you see Greedent as a defender on your team, you do not have a defender. Pick another defender. You need two defenders at that point, in my opinion. It just doesn't play the role very well. However, for what it does, it's very annoying and super fun. All right, our next defenders here. Where do we want to start with? Let's start with, you know what? Let's start with one of my big highlights from the recent sort of few patches, and that's Blastoise. I'm gonna put Blastoise up into our S tier. I think Blastoise might be the most slept on defender, even though people are playing it. I think the change to bring Blastoise down to 7 is amazing, and Blastoise was already really, really good. A little while back, I played Blastoise in a tournament, and it was doing so well that eventually it got target banned, and I was like, wow, I actually made a pretty big impact with this Pokemon, and that was before the level changes. It's so mean in lane. It can easily now get its evolution. It doesn't get stuck at Wartortle anymore. I just think Blastoise is doing insanely good inside the game right now. Mamoswine. Mamoswine and Snorlax both kind of hang out probably in this B+ tier for me. They don't have as much self-sustain, like sort of options that some of the other defenders have. However, they're both really good. You could set up really great picks for your team. I have fun playing both of them. I've had so much more fun playing Snorlax recently. I love Yawn lately. I have so, like, you jump into the enemy team, you land on multiple enemies, and you hit them with Yawn. Like, you get a huge stun, especially if you're going up against some of these super, you know, damage-heavy meta Pokemon like a Dragapult. If you can jump on a Dragapult and hit it with the Yawn, you may have just set up your team for, like, a win right there. And then with Mamo's just sick. It's so fun. Another cool thing about all these defenders is Resident Guard is such a good item on them. So Mamo is no exception. It's always up in the mix. You've always got that shield. It has a ton of HP. And man, its lane presence is really good. I love Mamo. It's awesome. Trevenant is just a hair away from S tier for me. Trevenant is also one of my favorite defenders inside the game. It finally got good and it stayed good. I love Trev. I think it's slightly beaten out by a couple other S tier defenders, but I do think Trev is absolutely amazing. I think Lapras is still S tier. I know it slid down some people's tier lists. That Unite move is on one of the craziest cooldowns in the game. It's so insanely low. It's so crazy impactful. It's so easy to use. You get so much value out of it. It's so hard to KO. I still think it's one of the most Dobrokin defenders in the game. Umbreon is also probably up there. Here's the interesting thing about Umbreon. Playing Mean Look Umbreon could be the most annoying thing in the game, and you can shut down an insanely good player on the enemy team. However, I still think Foul Play Snarl is a stronger overall build. It just depends on what value you want to bring to your team. Umbreon's Unite move is still absolutely crazy. It's so hard to KO this Pokemon. It's so good early. Gosh, defenders are just so nuts. And the next defender that I'm putting into our S tier, this one's, I mean, maybe at some point it'll be considered A+, but it has one of the most important Unite moves inside the entire game. And even with the nerf it got to Amnesia, I still feel like this Pokemon is crazy, crazy good. Maybe playing solo, you could knock it and Umbreon down a peg because they don't carry as hard as Blastoise or Lapras, but I think all of these defenders are truly crazy. Crustle, A+. Like, good job on your report card, buddy. Crustle is dumb. It's so dumb. It doesn't have the self-sustain, but its Unite move is, like, it's weird. Looking at all these defenders right now, some of these defenders just have Unite moves that are so unbelievably impactful. Its Unite move is that way, and X Scissors Stun is incredible. Whether you're playing it like full damage or you're playing it with Rock Tomb and you're setting up situations where you can stun your opponents super, super easy. Crustle's crazy good, and it's so cool that Crustle is in that spot right now. And then Goodra is also insanely good. Goodra, because of its self-sustain, it's either A+ or A. If I had to, I'd say probably Trev and Crustle beat it out a little bit, but Goodra is really, really good right now. And again, its self-sustain is unbelievable. Like, it's one of the hardest Pokemon in the game to KO. At some point, you just kind of have to walk away from it. It's like, oh, it used its Unite. Let's just leave it alone for a while. There's really nothing we can do about this Pokemon for a little bit. You pair a Goodra with a supporter. I played a game the other day. It was a Goodra, and you know it was playing solo, obviously, and there was just a Clefable that was on my team. I felt so bad for the enemy team. I was like, I don't know how they're ever going to KO me, and they didn't. It was very, very mean. All right, let's move on to our all-rounders right here as we're getting to our category for our last Pokemon inside the game, and this is the category with our most recent release, Metagross. So let's start putting them on the board. We got too many for this tier. Look at all these all-rounders here. This is a great song. It's available on iTunes, but you get it here for free. Yeah, look at all these. Gosh, there's so many of them. Here are our all-rounders. All right, here we go. So many great Pokemon inside the all-rounder category, and a few head-scratchers, but for the most part, a really, really solid group of Pokemon. Let's just start with a couple of and that's going to be Zacian and Mewtwo X. Zacian and Mewtwo X are without question S tier Pokemon. The EX, roster is EX for a reason. They're so good. Zacian, without saying who my god tier Pokemon is, Zacian's probably the best Pokemon in the game. I think it's probably the best. It just all around, like, it's hard to argue that Zacian's the best thing inside of Pokemon Unite. And then both Mewtwo X and Y are incredibly good for different reasons. I've seen some people starting to play kind of the Defender Mewtwo X, which is very fun. Sort of this, I know I've seen a few people play it, like Tetsuon, and I think Ender was popularizing it. I know Chris made a video about it. Mewtwo is so good that you literally can play it with EXP Share and a Resonant Guard and a Focus Band on, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I guess it's like a Defender. Like, there are just so many great ways to play this Pokemon. Zacian, on the other hand, is just a crazy, insane carry that's so dumb and broken and crazy. Okay, great. Let's get some other really high up ones. Blaziken, great right now. Blaziken is great. I think A+. It's either A or A+. I think probably A+. It's not as broken as Zacian or Mewtwo or anything like that, but man, Blaziken's awesome. And when you are flowing with Blaziken, it's just so fun. You have so much fun with this Pokemon. Released a little, okay, and then got some really nice buffs. Mimikyu is the same way. It was... Play Rough was broken. Right now, I don't think it's S tier broken, but I do think it's a really insanely good Pokemon. Whether you're playing Play Rough and you have to manage your cooldowns a little bit better, or you're playing Shadow Claw, my personal favorite way to play Mimikyu, I think both are insanely good right now. And they got those, you know, it's interesting. They got this sort of okay release into really solid buffs, and now they're doing very, very well. Both of them, I think, are great. Let's see. Where else do we want to go? Let's talk about Char. I think Char's good. Not great. I think it's B+ for me. Char is going to hang out in our B+ tier right here. And I know we can't see our entire tier list. I'm going to fix that here in a second once we kind of get all of our Pokemon sort of moved up onto it. But Char, I think, is a B+ choice. I still think they could buff Char if you wanted it to compete more intensely with things like Mewtwo and Zacian. Like, it's not as good. Like, let's be fair. Its Unite move is cancelable. But I do think Char is doing pretty good inside the game. I think Machamp's not doing too bad, but it's also not played that much, and I think it probably could use just a little zhuzhing, a little bit of a makeover so that it's a little more appealing. I've also noticed, like, it feels like its Unite move was more impactful, but now it's just kind of feels like it's easier to get away from, just walk out of. Pokemon with a lot of tenacity are just able to kind of like literally move out of its Unite as it's happening, which is sort of weird. I think Machamp is okay. I think B tier is a fair place to put it. Where do we want to go next? Let's go with, Buzzwole, A+. Buzzwole's maybe even honestly, Buzzwole's so good. Buzzwole is like slept on. Not even slept on. People know it's good at this point, but it's so freaking good. It carries so hard. It's so good in lane. Buzz is absolutely insane. Just such a good Pokemon, finally. Tyranitar. I'm going to probably put Tyranitar higher than most people do on their tier list. I think people are sleeping on Tyranitar. Tyranitar is better than people think. It's really strong. Its buffs that it got with its Battle Pass weren't insane, but Tyranitar is doing pretty dang well inside the game. You get to use its Unite move a lot more. The extra HP is very valuable for this thing. And honestly, I think T-Tar is better than people think. I do. Azumarill is good. Azumarill is good. It's like B+. Yeah. Strong in lane. Kind of falls off in value late game, but you can snowball very, very well with this thing and get a lot of value early from it and carry that into the late game. I love playing it too. It probably could still use some slight buffs to compete with some of the other all-rounders, but pretty solid. Zarina, I feel like, is actually doing quite a bit better right now. It might even be up into our A tier. It's a really hard one to pin down because Zarina is so good in the hands of high-skilled players, and I think the buffs to Zarina lately have been very, very nice. I'm going to cautiously put it up into our A tier, but I could see an argument that it's maybe a little closer to B+. But I think Zarina is doing very well. Lucario, I'm going to put in our B+ tier. It maybe is even closer to A. It's not bad at all. It does feel like it has sort of a wonky like placement in the meta. I feel like it's not amazing come end game. It doesn't, I don't know. I find it so good early, and then I do find it sort of like falls off in value as the match goes on and on. However, I love its Unite move change. Its new Unite move that it got like a few months back is so good. Garchomp, A tier for me. I think Garchomp's very, very good. Garchomp's maybe even better than A. It's really good. Being able to catch something with a dragon combo into your Unite move is so incredibly powerful. It's actually a lot stronger in lane than people think. I think Garchomp is doing very, very well inside the game right now. Let's see. Who else? Where do we want to go next? You know what? This is one of the ones I have the hardest time placing. I have to be honest. And that's Urshifu. I think Urshifu's gotten hurt quite a bit from some of its nerfs. But man, it's still pretty dang good. and it's a really hard one to place. And I think part of it is just because it's just kind of completely fallen off. Like, people don't pick it anymore. They just don't pick it. Like, a thing gets like a nerf and another thing gets a buff, and all of a sudden you just don't see Urshifu anymore. It probably would do better in a draft environment than a blind pick environment. I think it would be hard to assume that this Pokemon is not even A tier still. Even though it's fallen, I would say it's fallen from its pedestal in the S tier. I think it's hard to say this thing is not still A tier good. I just think it's not the flavor of the week at all right now, and people have kind of dropped it. Also, not a lot of people play Dark Bear at all, the single punch, and it's still really, really good. Its secure is insane, very powerful. I think A tier is a fair place to put this Pokemon, even though you really don't see it. We have Scyther and Scizor. I'm going to keep Scyther and Scizor in my C tier right here. And I know some people disagree with that, and I know I'm one of the most vocal, like something's wrong with Scizor people out there. I really think this Pokemon deserves a little more love. It's not terrible. It just never... It's never cracking like the top win rates. It's never getting into the meta. You never see it in tournament play. I really think Scizor and Scyther could use a small buff, and then all of a sudden become very, very viable. We've got Sword. Sword, I think, is good. I think Sword's probably B+. Maybe even A in the right hands. It's not bad at all. Really fun to play. Solid with some of the buffs it got a while back. But it's weird because some of these Pokemon you just look at like, oh, Aegislash is good. Yeah, is it as good as Zacian? Well, no. Well, Aegislash is good. Yeah, but wouldn't you rather have a Buzzwole? Well, yeah. So, Sword's a weird one. Maybe Sword can hang out in our A tier. I'm going to keep it in the B+ tier. Dragonite, I think, is pretty good. I actually think Outrage Dragonite is kind of killing it right now, but it's doing it softly. It's killing them softly. At some point I picked up a pen. It's killing them softly, and I actually think Dragonite is doing pretty dang good. I'm going to put it into our A tier right here. Some even like coordinated teams are playing Hyper Beam. I personally don't see it. I do not see Hyper Beam as a huge option inside the game right now, but I do think Outrage, like, it can be pretty nuts. And now finally, we are going to talk about our boy, Metagross. Metagross, alongside Meowscarada, Mimikyu, and Blaziken, are in a string of sort of okay releases that are all going to get buffed. Blaziken Mimikyu already has. Meowscarada has gotten buffed once. It might even get another buff. And now we have Metagross, who I think is actually okay. I think it's better than people think. I really do. I had a great time playing it. My win rate with it's pretty good. I think Magnet Rise and then one of the other two moves is the call for this Pokemon, but its Unite move is a disaster and it gets canceled in some really weird ways. And I do think this Pokemon does need a small, like, sort of quality of life buff to its Unite and a slight buff to its other moves. And for that reason, I can't place it higher than the B tier. Even though it's probably B+, I can't place it much higher. I do think this Pokemon, as I've mentioned in a previous video, it's like buying a really undervalued stock right now because there's no question that we're going to see some love for Metagross. So there is our tier list for the week. Let me sort of shrink this here so we can see everything in perspective as we talk about our God tier Pokemon. So we only put one Pokemon in our God tier. Here's the reality, and then I'm going to show you my pick. The reality is it's Zacian. It is. I think Zacian's the best Pokemon inside the game. Yes, I do. However, I'm not picking Zacian this week because God tier is the time where I can highlight something that I think is incredibly good that maybe people are sleeping on. For that reason, it's also not Clefable and Comfey because no one's sleeping on Clefable. People are somewhat sleeping on Comfey, but that is not what's really going on. The Pokemon that is God tier for me right now is Blastoise. I think Blastoise is actually one of the best things inside the game. It's one of the best things going right now, and it's a little undervalued. And for that reason, I'm putting it up into our God tier. While again, Zacian, in my opinion, is the best Pokemon inside the game. And I don't know. I think it'd be pretty hard to argue. There is your tier list. I hope you enjoyed it. And now, before we go, this. The thing is, anything attached to Comfey is incredibly broken, but nothing is more broken than Garchomp and Greedent with Comfey. Greedent is un-KOable and is able to create such a presence in the enemy central area that you make sure whatever Pokemon they're playing, whether it's, you know, Mewtwo Y, Zacian, Scyther, they can't get online. They can't get the kind of experience they need. And that's also why you see Pokemon all the way down here at the bottom, like Leafeon, Lapras. You can use this combination, this combination right here, to shut down the entirety of the enemy team. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I love you, and I'll see y'all next time. I dropped that pin I had.